The Trump administration just publicly dismissed one of the most dangerous fighter jets flying today as an inferior product, a cheap alternative not even worth considering. And what happened next might be the most embarrassing wake-up call American fighter pilots have faced in decades. And if you think this is just another political headline, I need you to stop what you're doing and pay very close attention, because what I'm about to tell you involves leaked military documents, real combat exercise results that the Pentagon does not want you talking about, diplomatic threats that could fracture the most important defense alliance in North American history, and a Swedish-built fighter jet at that has been quietly humiliating American aircraft in exercises all over the world. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why the most expensive weapons program in United States history, a program that has cost American taxpayers an estimated $1.8 trillion, is now facing a credibility crisis it may never recover from. So, if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this channel breaks down the stories the mainstream defense media doesn't want to touch. All right, so let's get into it. It all started when the United States ambassador to Canada, Pete Hora, appointed by President Donald Trump himself, went on camera with CBC News and essentially told the Canadian government that if they dared to buy the Swedish-built Saab Jazz 39 Gripen fighter jet instead of the American-made Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II, there would be consequences, serious consequences. And I'm not paraphrasing here, because Ambassador Hustra specifically warned that NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the joint military command that has protected the entire continent since the Cold War, would have to be, and I quote, altered. And he went further, saying that the United States would need to purchase more F-35s for its own Air Force and would fly them more often into Canadian airspace to address threats, essentially telling a sovereign allied nation that if they chose a different airplane, America would take over their skies. And that is an extraordinary statement. From a sitting United States ambassador to one of America's closest allies, a country that has fought alongside the United States in virtually every major conflict for over a century now. Here is where this story gets really interesting, and where the so-called inferior product starts to tell a very different story than what the Trump administration wants you to believe. Because while Washington was busy threatening Canada and dismissing the Gripen as not good enough, the actual combat exercise record of this Swedish fighter jet tells a story that should make every single American taxpayer sit up and ask some very uncomfortable questions about where their defense dollars are actually going. Let's go back to Red Flag Alaska 2006, one of the most prestigious and realistic multinational air combat exercises in the world, hosted by the United States Air Force, where the best pilots from allied nations come to test themselves in near-real combat conditions. And in that exercise, the Swedish Air Force brought their grips, and they were assigned to the Red Team, the adversary force, with reduced AWACS support and reduced ground support, meaning they were deliberately handicapped compared to the Blue Team, which had the full weight of American combat support behind them. And what happened next stunned the American pilots, because according to former Swedish Air Force flight engineer Stefan England, who actually participated in these exercises, the Greens connected their own link systems and essentially turned themselves into their own airborne early warning network. They generated their own battlefield awareness, they avoided all ground defenses, and on the very first day, they scored 10 simulated kills, including taking down a Eurofighter Typhoon, which is one of the most advanced fighter jets in all of Europe. And here's the part that really matters. They recorded 0 losses on day 1, they remained completely undetected, and one single green pilot managed to knock down 5 F-16 Block 50-plus fighters during close-air combat, 5 American-built F-16s taken out by one Gripen pilot, and throughout the entire exercise, the Gripens never lost a single aerial encounter and never failed a single mission objective. And on top of all of that, the Gripen was the only fighter in the entire exercise that performed every single planned sortie, while other aircraft, including American ones, were sitting on the ground waiting for weather conditions to improve. Now, I want you to think about that for a second, because this is the same airplane that the Trump administration is calling an inferior product. This is the same fighter jet that Ambassador Hora essentially said was not worthy of protecting North American airspace. And yet, in a United States Air Force-hosted exercise, it dominated the battlefield against American-built aircraft. And that exercise was not some one-time fluke either, because the record goes deeper. During joint exercises with the Royal Norwegian Air Force, 3 Swedish Gripens went up against 5 Norwegian F-16s, and the results were devastating. 5-0 in the first round, 5-0 in the second round, and 5-1 in the third round, meaning 3 Gripens systematically destroyed 5 F-16s almost every single time, with only one single loss across 3 full rounds of combat. And it gets even more uncomfortable for American defense planners, because during exercise Loyal Arrow in Sweden, 3 United States Air Force F-15 Sea Eagles, one of America's most iconic air superiority fighters, were intercepted by a single Gripen acting as an aggressor. And the result was 2 F-15s shot down, with only one managing to escape. And even that escape was only possible because the F-15 had a better thrust-to ratio that allowed it to simply run away from the engagement. And to be fair, the Gripen was operating in its home territory during that exercise. But the point stands: a single fourth-generation generation Swedish fighter took on 3 of America's premier air superiority jets and walked away, having killed 2 of them. And then there is Falcon Strike 2015 in Thailand, where the Royal Thai Air Force was flying Gripens against Chinese People's Liberation Army Air Force Su-27 flankers, and the Gripens absolutely dominated. Thai pilots achieved 41 simulated shootdowns against the Chinese fighters while losing only 9 Gripens. And 88% of those kills were achieved from beyond visual range at 19 miles or more, demonstrating that the Gripen sensors, radar, and missile integration are genuinely world-class. Now, you might be asking yourself, okay, so the Gripen does well in exercises, but exercises are not real combat. And that is a fair point. But here's what makes the Gripen story so compelling and why the Trump administration's dismissal of it is so tone-deaf. Because the real genius of the Gripen is not just that it can fight, it is how it fights and what it costs to fight with. The Gripen was designed from the ground up by Sweden, a small nation that knew it could never outspend Russia in a potential conflict. So instead of building the most expensive fighter possible, they built the smartest one, a jet that can operate from 500-meter strips of public highway that can be turned around, rearmed, and refueled in under 20 minutes by a small team of conscript mechanics, not highly trained specialized technicians working in climate-controlled hangars, actual conscripts with basic training. And this is not theoretical, because the Swedish military has practiced dispersed highway operations for decades as part of their Base 90 system, which spreads aircraft across the entire country to avoid having them destroyed on the ground in a first strike. Now compare that to the F-35, which requires specialized climate-controlled facilities, highly trained maintenance crews, extended maintenance windows, and has historically struggled with readiness rates that have frustrated Pentagon officials for years. And by readiness, I mean the percentage of the fleet that is actually ready to fly on any given day. And this is where the cost numbers become absolutely staggering, because while the exact figures are debated, published estimates put the Gripen's cost per flight hour somewhere between $4,700 and roughly $8,000 to $10,000, depending on the source and what costs are included, while the F-35's cost per flight hour has been estimated anywhere from about $30,000 to over $40,000 per hour. And even if you take the most conservative estimates that are generous to the F-35 and skeptical of the Gripen, you are still looking at a fighter jet that costs several times more per hour to fly. And over a 30-year service life with hundreds of thousands of flight hours across a fleet, that cost difference adds up to tens of billions of dollars, billions with a B. And that is money that is not going to pilot training, not going to readiness, not going to actually keeping aircraft in the sky where they can defend the nation. And this is not just some theoretical concern, because the F-35 program is the most expensive weapons acquisition program in the history of the United States military, with a total estimated lifetime cost of approximately $1.8 trillion. And even President Trump himself has had a complicated relationship with the program, because back when he was first running for president, he called the F-35's cost, quote, out of control, and even asked Boeing to price out a comparable F-18 Super Hornet as an alternative. And then in May of 2025, during a round in Doha, Qatar, Trump surprised the entire defense world by publicly criticizing the F-35 single-engine design, saying he doesn't like single engines and suggesting that a twin-engine replacement he called the F-55 was in the works. Cosmopolitan comments that left former Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall, quote, mystified, and had aviation experts wondering if the president was freelancing about aircraft programs that don't actually exist. And even Elon Musk, one of Trump's closest allies, has publicly dismissed the F-35 as inferior to drone swarms, a claim that defense analyst Richard Abuafia called a complete fantasy. So you have the president himself criticizing the F-35, his closest tech advisor calling it obsolete, and yet his own ambassador is out there threatening America's closest ally for daring to consider an alternative. And if that contradiction doesn't bother you, then I don't know what will. Now, let me tell you what is happening on the global stage right now, because this story is not just about Canada. It is about a seismic shift in how America's allies view their relationship with Washington and with American defense contractors. Because the Trump administration's aggressive trade policies and confrontational diplomacy have created an environment where countries that have been loyal American allies for decades are now openly questioning whether they can depend on the United States as a reliable defense partner. Spain and Portugal both canceled their F-35 orders after the United States levied tariffs against their countries. Switzerland downgraded its original 36 UN F-35 order because the initial cost estimates turned out to be too low. And Denmark, which already operates the F-35 as its only fighter jet, has members of parliament publicly expressing second thoughts, with the head of the Danish parliament's defense committee, Rasmus Jarlov, telling Canadian media to, quote, choose another fighter jet. And Jarlov's reasoning was chilling, because he pointed out that the F-35s are in for repairs about half the time, and that the Americans have all the power to destroy Denmark's entire air force simply by shutting down part supplies. And that is an elected NATO allies defense committee chairman publicly warning another country not to buy American because of the leverage it gives Washington. Meanwhile, Colombia signed a multi-billion-dollar deal for 17 Gripen ENF aircraft in late 2025. Brazil has 36 Gripens on order and is negotiating for more with local assembly by Ember. Peru is planning to purchase 24 Gripens, and Saab is offering Canada a package deal of 72 Gripen E and F fighters plus 6 Global Eye airborne early warning and control aircraft, a deal that Saab says would create 12,600 jobs in Canada. And here is the part that the Trump administration really does not want Americans to know. The United States might actually have the power to block Canada from buying the Gripen because the Gripen E is powered by a General Electric F414 engine, an American-made engine, which means Washington could potentially use export controls to veto the sale. And there are already reports that Trump administration officials have privately said the United States would not allow highly classified data to be shared over a network where the Gripen was present, essentially threatening to cut Canada out of the NORAD intelligence sharing system if they buy the Swedish jet. And if you are an American taxpayer, you should be asking yourself whether using that kind of coercive leverage against your closest ally is really making America stronger, or whether it is driving allies into the arms of competitors and undermining the very alliance system that has kept America safe since the end of World War II. Now, I want to bring this back to what actually matters from a pure military capability standpoint, because at the end of the day, what should matter most is whether the men and women who fly these aircraft are getting the best tool for the mission. And while the F-35 is undeniably a technological marvel with genuine fifth-generation stealth capabilities, advanced sensor fusion and networking abilities that no other fighter in the world can match, the question that defense planners are increasingly asking is whether all of that technology matters. If you can only afford to fly the jet for a fraction of the hours you need to maintain pilot proficiency, if your readiness rates mean that half your fleet is grounded on any given day, and if the entire program creates a dependency on a single country that has shown it is willing to weaponize that dependency for political purposes. And the Gripen's answer to those questions is a fighter that may not be invisible to radar, but that can fly 3 to 4 times more hours for the same budget, that can operate from a frozen highway in the Arctic, that can be maintained by small teams with modest training, that integrates NATO's standard Link 16 data links and carries the Meteor Beyond Visual Range missile, which is arguably the most capable air-to-air missile in the Western arsenal, and that has proven in exercise after exercise that it can go toe-to-toe with fighters that cost dramatically more and come out on top. Now, I'm not here to tell you that the Gripen is better than the F-35 in every scenario, because it's not. The F-35 has capabilities that the Gripen simply cannot match, particularly in the realm of stealth and sensor fusion and the ability to penetrate advanced integrated air defense systems. But what I am telling you is that calling the Gripen an inferior product is not just wrong, it is dangerously arrogant, and it is the kind of arrogance that gets people hurt. Because when you dismiss a threat or a competitor without understanding what makes them effective, you are setting yourself up for exactly the kind of rude awakening that American pilots experienced at Red Flag, Alaska, when a supposedly inferior Swedish fighter jet flew circles around aircraft that cost many times more. And if you have found this breakdown valuable and you want to see more deep dives into the stories that actually matter in the world of defense and geopolitics, then do me a favor right now and smash that like button, because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who deserve to hear the full story, not just the version that defense lobbyists and politicians want you to hear. Let me leave you with one final thought, because there is a bigger picture here that goes beyond any single fighter jet, and it is this. For decades, the United States built its global influence not just through military power, but through the trust of its allies, through the idea that being America's partner meant you were protected and respected. And what we are watching right now in real time is that trust being eroded not by America's enemies, but by America's own government. And when a 72% majority of Canadians now support incorporating the Gripen into their Air Force, according to polling by Ecos Politics, when NATO allies from Denmark to Spain are reconsidering their dependence on American hardware, when defense experts like Margaret Kosal, a former Defense Department official and associate professor at Georgia Tech, describes the uneasiness over the F-35 as a potential canary in the coal mine, signaling a lack of confidence in the United States. That should concern every single American, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, because the strength of American defense has never been about any single airplane. It has been about the network of alliances and partnerships that multiply American power across the globe. And if we lose that network because we were too arrogant to respect a Swedish fighter jet and too aggressive to treat our allies as equals, then it doesn't matter how many F-35s we build, because we will be flying them alone, and that is a future that nobody should want. Thank you for watching. I'm going to keep covering this story as it develops, because the Canada fighter jet decision could come at any time, and the implications are massive. So if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time.